Hello, my name's Paul Nation. You can find out more about me by looking on my website. Just Google's Paul Nation and you'll get there. There are lots of free things there for teachers. Today I want to talk about how you can find out whether your language course is a well-balanced language course or not. That means, is it giving enough opportunities for learning for the students so that they have a good chance of learning the four skills well? There's a basic principle which lies behind the planning of a good language course, and it's called the principle of the Four Strands. And the principle says this: if you want to have a well-balanced language course which provides a good range of opportunities for language learning, then your language course needs to have four equal strands. Equal means an equal amount of time is spent on each strand. Now, a strand is something which is long and thin and stretches through a whole program. I used to demonstrate the meaning of strand by taking out a strand of my hair and showing it, but I can't afford to do that nowadays. So long as you get the idea then that a strand is something that runs through the whole course. So there are four strands in a well-balanced course. The first strand is the strand of meaning-focused input. And meaning-focused input means learning through listening and through reading. So the learner is getting input and learning from that input. And about a quarter of the course time should be spent learning through meaning-focused input. It's called meaning-focused input because when the learner is listening, the learner is trying to understand what's being said. And when the learner is reading, the learner is reading like a real native speaker reader, trying to understand the story of what they're reading and trying to get some enjoyment out of it. So this strand of meaning-focused input should take about 25% of the course time. The second strand of a well-balanced course is the strand of meaning-focused output. Meaning-focused output involves learning through speaking and writing. It's meaning-focused, and this means that when the learners speak and when they write, they're not just repeating sentences, but they're trying to communicate messages to other people. The strand of meaning-focused output should take up about 1/4 of a course time. The third strand is the strand of language-focused learning. And language-focused learning means deliberately focusing on language features, studying vocabulary, studying pronunciation, studying grammar, studying discourse. All of these fit in the strand of language-focused learning. The important thing about the strand of language-focused learning is that, like the other three strands, it should only take up 25% of the course time. Unfortunately, in many language courses, language-focused learning takes up far too much time. So a really important thing a teacher can do to try and get balance into a course is to make sure that the language-focused learning strand is not taking up too much class time. The fourth strand of a well-balanced course is the strand of fluency development. And fluency development means becoming fluent with what you already know. In the fluency development strand of a course, there should be no unfamiliar vocabulary or unfamiliar grammatical features. The learners should be largely familiar with the topics that are covered in that part of the course. But the goal of that strand, of the fluency development strand, is to become really good at using what's already known. Now, the fluency development strand needs to cover each of the four skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And so 1/4 of the fluency development strand should be on developing listening fluency. 1/4 of the fluency development strand should be on speaking fluency, 1/4 on reading fluency, and 1/4 on writing fluency. This four strands principle works best if the content matter and the topics covered in each of the four strands are the same. Where the strands are well integrated in content, then you have the greatest opportunities for repetition to occur and for repetition to help learning. Let's now look at each of the four strands to see the kinds of activities which can occur in each strand. In the meaning-focused input strand, we have extensive listening and extensive reading. Extensive listening means listening to lots of material which is just outside the learner's current level of knowledge. From a vocabulary perspective, we define being just outside their present level of knowledge by saying that no more than 1 or 2 words out of every 100 should be unfamiliar words for the learners. So that means around 98% of the words in any listening text that they hear should already be familiar to them. And they have an opportunity to learn more vocabulary through the few new words that they meet, the 1 or 2% of the words that they meet through listening that they don't know. The second important part of the meaning-focused input strand is extensive reading. And if you want to make the single most important change that can be made to a language course, then what you can do is introduce an extensive reading program into your language course. There is a lot of research on the effects of extensive reading, and this research shows that if learners do reasonable amounts of extensive reading, their language proficiency develops very well indeed. The single most important change a teacher can make to a language course to improve it is to include a well-developed extensive reading program. And in another video, we will come back and look at extensive reading in some detail. But you can find out more about it by going onto the web and Googling extensive reading and looking, for example, at the Extensive Reading Foundation website, or looking at Reading Central, a website which is there to support teachers who want to set up extensive reading programs. Another part of meaning-focused input is the listening which occurs when learners do conversation activities. And when they do conversation activities, one learner is listening and the other is speaking. And that listening can be meaning-focused input, which is considered part of the meaning-focused input strand. The meaning-focused output strand involves the skills of speaking and writing. The kinds of activities which are done for speaking involve problem-solving role plays, ranking activities, discussion activities, where the learners use the language for real communication. It's hard to distinguish meaning-focused output activities involving speaking from meaning-focused input, because meaning-focused input and meaning-focused output are mixed when we have pair work or group work which involves speaking. Part of the meaning-focused output strand is writing. And in the writing part of meaning-focused output, learners should do writing where they get some feedback. They should do writing on projects, and they should do writing such as writing letters, writing emails, which cover the kinds of writing that they need to do in everyday life. The meaning-focused input and the meaning-focused output strands both involve incidental learning. Incidental learning means that you learn language features of vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and discourse without having to consciously focus on them or being taught by the teacher. You learn these things by having to use the language. The third strand of a well-balanced language course is the strand of language-focused learning. Language-focused learning involves deliberately focusing on language features, such as the sounds of the language, the vocabulary of the language, the grammar of the language, the discourse of the language. It also includes strategies for language learning. An activity in the language-focused learning strand that teachers do quite a lot is the strand of intensive reading. In some countries, when teachers do intensive reading with their learners, they use the first language as a way of making the intensive reading more meaningful. This is actually a reasonable thing to do. But what must be remembered is that if you do intensive reading, such as using a grammar translation approach, this should only make up one part of 1/4 of the language-focused learning strand. It shouldn't be a major part of the whole course. Another part of the language-focused learning strand is doing deliberate activities, such as filling the blanks and joining sentences, and focusing directly on the language. It also includes deliberately learning words and so on. The fourth part of the language-focused learning strand involves the teacher actually teaching the learners about the language, explaining the meaning of words, explaining difficult grammatical features, explaining how parts of a text fit together to make a meaning for the whole. All of this is part of language-focused learning. Now you might notice that teaching, where the teacher is up in front of the class actually presenting material to the learners, is really only a small part of a language course. Most of the time, the learners should be focusing on meaning-focused input and meaning-focused output, and doing some deliberate learning where they take control of their own learning to some degree. But for some small parts of the language-focused learning strand, the teacher is the focus of attention and the person who delivers the lessons and the information. The fourth part of the language-focused learning strand, then, is deliberate teaching by the teacher. The fourth strand is the strand of fluency development. And the strand of fluency development really needs to have 4 separate parts, each part for one of the 4 skills of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. For example, to develop listening fluency, learners can do activities which are called quick listens. Quick listens involves the learners listening to a very easy text and then answering a few questions after they listen to the text. Nowadays we have tape recorders or apps where you can play listening material at various speeds without distorting the sound of the speaking. These are very good for developing listening fluency. For speaking fluency development, there is a very useful activity called the 4-3-2 activity. In this activity, the learners work in pairs. We have learner A and learner B. They choose a very easy topic to talk about, and learner A talks about this topic for 4 minutes, while learner B listens and doesn't interrupt, but tries to look interested. After 4 minutes, the teacher says stop, and the learners change partners, and learner A gets a different learner to come and listen. Then the learner delivers the same talk, so learner A gives the same talk for the second time to a new learner, but this time has only 3 minutes to deliver the talk. At the end of 3 minutes, the teacher says stop, change partners, the learners change, learner A gets a third listener, and then learner A has to deliver the talk in 2 minutes. Now, by the time the learner gets to the 2-minute talk, the topic is very familiar to learner A, and learner A can speak much more quickly than they could at the 4-minute talk. For reading, there's a very useful activity called speed reading. And a speed reading course involves a series of very easy passages which are well within the learner's proficiency level. Each time you do this activity, each learner takes a passage, reads the passage, notes how long it took them to read it, and enters their reading speed on a chart. They answer questions which are based on the passage, and then they mark their answers to the questions themselves. After doing 20 such passages, many learners double their reading speed. On average, the whole class will increase their reading speed by about 50%, but some learners will go even faster than that. They're not becoming super fast readers, they're just starting to get near the kind of reading speed that native speakers usually read at. A speed reading course is a very good thing to include in an extensive reading program, because by increasing the learner's reading speed, you can increase the amount of reading that they do, and as the amount of reading increases, they have greater opportunities to learn new vocabulary and to get on top of new grammatical features through incidental learning. If we look at writing fluency, a very useful activity for that is called 10-minute writing. In 10-minute writing, the learner thinks of a very easy topic. And then when the teacher says, "Okay, are you ready? Go," the learner writes as much as they can about that topic, not worrying about whether it's correct or not, but trying to write as much as possible. At the end of 10 minutes, the teacher says, "Stop." The learners stop writing, and they count the number of words that they've written. They then enter the number of words onto a chart, and their goal is to make the number of words go up each time they do 10-minute writing. The teacher doesn't mark this writing, because if the teacher gave attention to the grammar, this would slow down the learner's performance, because they would be worried about getting things right and they wouldn't write just what they were thinking about. But the teacher can respond to the content and say, "That was really interesting. Write more about that next time." Or, "I didn't understand that bit you wrote about this. Can you explain more about that next time?" And so this 10-minute writing activity then is a fluency development activity where the learners use what they already know, but are pushed to go faster than they would normally go. So now we've looked at the 4 strands: the strand of meaning-focused input, the strand of meaning-focused output, the strand of language-focused learning, and the strand of fluency development. And in a well-planned course, roughly equal time is spent on each strand over the period of, say, a month or 2 months. This doesn't mean that every lesson must contain the 4 strands. It doesn't have to be like that. But over a period of time, there should be a roughly equal balance of the 4 strands. Now you can check whether your language course is a well-balanced language course or not by keeping a note of the kinds of activities that you do in your course and how much time you spend on each activity. And then you have to classify those activities into each of the 4 strands. And then you add up the amount of time spent on each strand. And if the amount of time isn't roughly equal for each strand, then you need to make some adjustments to your course. Some courses don't even include a fluency development strand. Some courses don't even have an extensive reading program, which is a terrible omission from a language program. And some courses spend far too much time on language-focused learning, with the teacher up the front doing all the work. The principle of the Four Strands is a way of trying to provide a balance of learning opportunities for learners, so that they have an opportunity to learn incidentally through the meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, and fluency development strands. And they have an opportunity to learn deliberately through the language-focused learning strand. So a good thing that you can do as a teacher is just to look at your own course, keep a note of what you do over the period of a month or so, and see if you are getting a balance of learning opportunities across the four strands. And if you're not, think about how you can get that balance by removing or spending less time on some activities, and by introducing other activities or spending more time on other activities. Thank you for your patience.